good morning, depending on where you are in the world. Welcome to Raising Excellence, the most important 90 minutes of your day. Hello, I'm Michael, the Opportunity Ambassador and MC for today's show. And the title for today's show is
Fermenting
Fermenting.
Freedom.
Yes, we're going to be talking about fermenting today. And before we get to that, though, let me introduce my co-host. Today we've got Agnieszka, the psychosomatic illuminator.
Oh,
Willow,
I should have said potion master too.
Oh, okay.
So that's what the show's about.
Definitely should have thrown that in there. And Willow, our trauma consultant.
Hi, everyone.
Dennis, our freedom facilitator.
Greetings and blessed love, fermenting friends.
And Gabriel, another potion master and returning co-host.
Fermenter.
Thank you for having me.
Thank you for being here.
When the way you say it, Dennis, it sounds like Terminator, the fermenter. Should be some kind of a movie.
Where do we want to begin? And who's going to give us the introduction to what we're going to talk about today?
I think a resident fermentation expert should do so. And that's not me. And I don't think it's Dennis either.
Well, I guess it's up to Gabriel to introduce to us the topic for today's show.
All right. So today we're going to talk about fermentation and food cultures of different varieties and the value they can bring to your life, what they can do for your health, and how they can improve what you do in your day-to-day.
Well, that sounds simple enough.
Well said. Well, I'd love to go into the meaning of the word fermentation. Do you guys know where it comes from?
Apparently it comes from Latin.
Beer, I'm guessing. Is it beer?
Yeah, so the root word of it is Latin. It goes back to French, and then that goes back to Latin. And so the basic of it is fervere, and that actually means to boil or to seethe.
Like a fever, right? Like when somebody has a high fever, that's the same root word, fever.
So the word fervent, fever. You can relate that to it. And it's interesting because fermentation actually doesn't really have anything to do with heat. Boiling you associate with heat, but it's actually boiling without heat, which is interesting in itself, isn't it?
Depends on your definition of heat, I suppose, because in very cold climate, fermentation wouldn't really occur or would occur very slowly. So there has to be some level of temperature there, right? Right, Mr.
True.
Master, fermentation master?
Yeah, ideally you're looking for a temperature range around 60 degrees Fahrenheit, and when you move up, you accelerate the process of the fermentation or the food culture's activity, and you can safely go up into the mid to high 80s before you start getting negative results depending on what you're trying to bring about.
I have a definition. Fermentation is any metabolic process in which microorganisms' activity creates a desirable change in food and beverage, whether it's increasing flavor, preserving, or providing health benefits.
So I've got a question. When it comes to the benefits, what kind of benefits does fermentation deliver?
Well, a huge one would be that it makes nutrients more available to you. So there's several processes, and fermenting is really just one of them. But you have when you make bone broth, for example. So you would be simmering, bones in an acidic environment or in an acidic liquid. That would be also a process that makes nutrients more available. You have the culturing of milk products. Which is tradition like all over the world, it seems. And you have sprouting as well. We touched upon that, I think, in the last show. And that is also a way of increasing the nutrient density in your food. And pickling. Not sure if I missed any.
And the pickling is also in that range where you're getting more mineral and stuff, but or some of those just for the taste?
Gabriel, you want to touch upon that? You have experience with pickling? I haven't pickled anything myself yet, but that's, I just know it as what you get over the counter. But I would I would classify that actually as almost like a cousin of fermenting. Would you agree with that? Or you're muted still, Gabriel?
Thank you. Yeah, and I would, and there's a great deal of overlap. Fermentation is sort of like it's a way of encapsulating what you're doing with all of it, and so the cultures also require similar conditions to achieve the same results, and so all of these sort of fit under fermentation. We see it in different ways, different varieties that we can go into a little bit later.
And another effect of fermenting is that the enzyme content of the food that you're fermenting is increased highly, and that is a interesting topic by itself. What enzyme rich food can do for you, and there has been like studies and extensive work done on that, how that basically will give you like a huge amount of energy, and may increase your life expectancy and many other things in itself.
This could be like with the digestion of the food, as well as I guess what people would call probiotics and stuff like that, right?
Absolutely. I read a study once. Oh my goodness, can I speak? I read a study once that talked about enzymes and how as we get older, there are less and less enzymes naturally occurring in the body. And so supplementing enzymes and probiotics and things like that as we age in our bodies is very important for continued, health and well-being.
And one thing to note here that when we're talking about pickling, at least, there's two different kinds. Not all pickling is created equal. There is the fermentation method, which is a natural process that supports the microbes that naturally occur on primarily on the skin and the surface of the vegetables, and compare that with what's referred to as a quick pickle, which is basically a hack and a shortcut. So basically the benefit that you're getting is from whatever you're using to create that flavor profile. It's generally accomplished with vinegar, which of course is its own type of fermentation, but it's used as a flavoring element and specifically not as an element that creates a community of microbes that benefit your digestion.
Quite the opposite.
It's important to make sure. Exactly. Quite the opposite. You're throwing off your acidity level with unnatural acids that are not naturally occurring in the foods, and that can cause other problems that actually get in the way of digestion and bioavailability rather than supporting it the way traditional fermentation methods of pickling can accomplish.
Since we are talking about pickling, and part of the title is about freedom, the only thing I have to contribute to this conversation is Joel Salatin actually, I don't know who he talked to or how he did it, but he basically backed a loophole for selling pickles out of your own kitchen. It has to be in your kitchen. You can make up to $3,000 per kitchen from selling pickles. And that was one of the cool things about like food freedom that Joel Salatin helped introduce. Has nothing to do with fermentation, but it was interesting.
Kind of does. I say it does.
Kind of.
Yeah, it's cool.
And it's an interesting point because we have authorities that dictate our rights and our abilities to access these, and it's important to find these loopholes. And fermentation is one of those things that provides us a lot of opportunities to work our way outside of the system from within and to liberate ourselves through everything from basic shelf stability of food storage to getting the most out of the foods that you do have access to wherever you get them.
Yeah, well, I think to some degree, so I'll just add something. So like with dairy fermentation and stuff like that, there is a lot of kind of products and stuff that you can get from dairy that might necessarily, people might feel like, like their milk is spoiled. that may not actually necessarily be such a bad thing after all.
Depends on the milk. So this is a great soapbox opportunity for me, because I see there are so many benefits to raw milk, yet in a lot of the civilized countries, raw milk is deemed illegal and unhealthy and bad for you, whatever. But if you do have raw milk, you can totally leave it on the counter. It'll ferment, like it'll sour itself into something that's delicious and great, good on potatoes, good as a basis for making cheese. It's a very versatile, useful thing. Versus once you pasteurize the milk and then it sours, then the whole thing is just garbage. You have to throw it in the garbage. It basically ruins the food. This high pasteurization that they talk about. And by the way, hi Igor.
You led me to a soapbox that I like to talk about. I don't know much about the process of all this stuff, but I do know a little bit about the regulations surrounding dairy and turning it into other cultures, sour cream, cheeses, all that stuff. At one point, the Food and Drug, the FDA said that it was illegal. They had to change all of their process from like wood bowls and wood countertops and wood cutting boards to stainless steel because it was easier to sanitize. And that actually was the wrong thing to do. You saw a huge increase in the amount of the bad bacteria, like, E. coli and salmonella and all this, well, I guess not salmonella, so it's not with cheeses, I don't think. But you saw an uptick of cases because all of the good bacteria that was overcoming the bad bacteria came from the wooden cutting boards. And as soon as they switched to stainless steel, all of that good bacteria wasn't able to outcompete the bad and ended up making like all of their product worthless. So they actually had to fight to get back their wooden utensils. And in a lot of homemade recipes, I can't tell you how many of them say do not use metal bowls, do not use metal silverware, don't use metal stuff in the cooking of this. Always use wooden or glass or something else.
And that's true. That's an important point and a good segue, because a big part of fermentation in food cultures is to generating an environment where the beneficial and the positive microbes are allowed to thrive and propagate such that they crowd out and overpower the bad bacteria. And to Agnieszka's point with the dairy, raw milk is a perfect example of this. Before the heat treatment and the chemical processing, there is a variety of good and bad microbes. And what you'll find is that left to their own devices, the good overcome the bad and finally, result in a product that's edible and delicious. But when you expose it to the heat treatments, you're getting rid of everything in it that makes it wholesome. You're getting rid of everything in it that makes it supportive of life. And this is one thing that we see. I can't tell you how many different examples I could cite in terms of yogurt, in terms of kefir, name a cultured product, and you'll find that the ones that you buy off the shelf are produced with lab grade cultures, which means they don't have any competition, they don't have any diversity. And if you try to get more than one life cycle out of those microbes, you may be successful the first time, but the second time you're more likely to find a jar of rotten milk. And it's really disappointing. It's really frustrating. And it's something that we see played out on our grocery shelves every day. Whereas if we took those processes into our own hands, we can produce something that when it runs low, we just top it off with the source material, and those microbes go right into action and they start producing a whole new replacement for the product that you just ate or consumed.
Can you explain that more? Because that's interesting. Like, what do you mean? Like, how does that work in practice? So you grab a liter of milk and let the microbes do the work?
Sure. So, for example, let's talk about sourdough starter. I think that's a good place to start with this. So you have a sourdough starter, and the easiest way I could offer to let people get started is to take a measurement by weight in equal parts of water and flour and combine them and put a piece of cloth over it that allows circulation of air. And those provide the conditions necessary for a sourdough starter to take hold. Now, one thing that you can use to give it a boost is what's called barley syrup. Barley flour is one of the most active flours that you can use when you're creating a sourdough starter, and you can capture some of those benefits by taking some of that barley syrup and just a tablespoon or so at the bottom of the jar before you introduce the makings of your sourdough starter, and you can give it a head start, and it'll be much more active in the awakening process.
But hang on, so like I can't use, because barley syrup is some weird ingredient I've never heard of. Can't I just use sugar or something?
Well, the problem with that is that the microbes that you're dealing with in a sourdough starter, they don't respond to sugars per se. They're responding to the starch, which, excuse me, which their own metabolic process then converts into sugar to burn as energy. And then the output of that process is the gas. So when you have a sourdough starter that's active and you leave it alone for a little bit, if you leave it alone too long with a little too much food, you'll find that it explodes up and out of the jar just because it gets so active and just blows up. But if you use sugar, you can get some of that activity, but it's going to be vastly muted and compared to feeding that culture, that community of microbes, what they're really seeking, which is starch. And this is also true in fermentation, but sourdough is an ideal example. And so when you use sourdough...
So hang on. So if you don't have this magical barley syrup, do you just use flour and water? That's it?
Flour and water is all you need. Barley syrup is just something that you can use to give yourself a little bit of a boost in the process if you have access to it. You can find it in natural food stores, health food stores, organic stores.
With the sugars, kind of like where the demerara sugar and all of that stuff is?
No, you'll usually find it with the specialty syrups. And sometimes, depending on the quality, you can also find it in the refrigerated section.
Okay, tell us more about fermentation, master fermenter person.
So I'll pick up where I left off on the sourdough, because we asked what it looks like when you consume and restore these cultures that you put together. So for sourdough, it looks like this. You have a starter. You let it start bubbling and becoming active, and it gets that nice, it's a pleasant sour smell. And once you've got that, you've got your activity. And from there on, you have an endless cauldron of life that you can draw from forever. In fact, I have a sourdough starter that I began over 10 years ago, and I could not create the conditions for this critter to die. And so he earned the name Lazarus through the numerous deaths and resurrections.
I was just about to say, did you name him?
It did earn a name. I figured 10 years was worthy of a name at that point. So Lazarus is the same culture that I started with. And all I do is I take out enough to make what I need. And we can talk about discard a little bit later, but I take off what I need. And then I just replace that, whatever I used, with that rough balance of flour and water by weight 1-to-1 ratio, and just fill it up again. And that does two things. One, it keeps it active, and two, it makes sure that it's ready to go for the next time. So if I do that and then I leave it out, that culture, that the fuel that I provided there is ready to go for another batch. And so I just carve out, ladle out enough to make a sourdough pizza crust, for example. For me, that looks like just a pinch of salt, a couple drops of olive oil, and enough flour to get it up to the consistency that you like working with for your sourdough. That's entirely a matter of taste. And lay it out and into a sheet. You can press it down by hand into a baking sheet, or you can toss it the traditional way and throw that in the oven, and you do what's called a blind bake. And so when you have discard, you can make pizza crusts. You blind bake them, and what I did is I just blind baked several at a time, and I would just stick those in a freezer bag, and I would have pizza ready to go whenever I wanted. So I'd slap down a little bit of sauce, breakfast pizza, dinner pizza, whatever I wanted. It's all ready to go in about 10 minutes.
And blind bake means like pre-bake with no toppings on it.
That's correct.
I deduced.
Right. So the blind bake is just baking it till it just gets a touch of color and holds its form.
Now I really wish that I had eaten before this episode. I did not realize. I was like, I feel like an idiot. I'm like, of course we're going to be talking about food.
I was gonna say the same. Something that I thought was really profound, Gabriel, that you said when you were talking about milk. You said if you just leave it to itself, the good will overcome the bad or the evil. So I thought that might be a great metaphor right there. Like if you don't add anything deadly, artificial, like unnatural heat, or which would be the pasteurization or the homogenization, which is like putting stuff through a sieve so tiny that it will filter out everything and break up the molecules, and just to prevent it from coming back together again. Like I think that's a great metaphor right there.
Yeah, and I think it's a fitting metaphor for life in a lot of ways too. Most people want to do good, and it's outside external forces forcing their hand and removing their choices that drives them to more of the negative side. But left to their own devices and to convene and grow a community with others, it generally results in the positive.
Yeah, and fear plays a role because many of us have been educated or grew up believing that if you don't pasteurize it, if you don't ultra heat it, then oh God, bacteria could be in there and it could make you sick, whatever. But if you look at Pasteur himself, like he supposedly on his deathbed, like he revoked a lot of the things that that people used, like some of the experiments and some of the things that he brought forward, like pasteurization goes back to Pasteur. So he a short while before his death, he actually said he said that much of what he discovered or thought he discovered before actually is not all of that. But then there were other processes and other players in the field who saw the great benefits for profit, and I guess then greed comes in as well, because if you ultra heat those foods, they lose a lot of their nutrients, for example. But on the other side, you can make them last for a long time, and that means the shelf security. That means that you can make a lot at the same time, and it can last in the supermarket. You can store it. You can strategically ship them and store them, so you can make more money off it. But then somebody is going to lose out in the end, which is we who eat that stuff and who get sick over time.
And you're talking out of Germany with all that natural food and good full fats and everything. In North America, we ain't got no hope. Seriously. This is like, I wish I had access to what you have in Germany. I wish I had access to all that stuff. I mean, I can get the good French yogurt, but it's like $15 for little 4 containers.
Yeah, we have if you're talking about milk, we have a thriving milk industry here.
And natural, and
I can't even find French yogurt. All I can find is fat-free yogurt. It's a great day when I find whole yogurt. I'm like, yeah, here's the good stuff. Yeah. People look at me like I'm insane in the grocery store.
Well, it has to be full fat and grass-fed, right?
And organic. Yeah, it's true, but like that, those kind of things. Back in Jamaica, I was looking for them, and like we didn't even find them. And if we found something that got at least a little close, it wasn't organic, but at least it was grass fed. But it was like what's in there, like a piece of gold. Like how do you explain the price for this something? But yeah, so that's really, there's a lot of things that we have available here that I was missing a lot before, and that's.
Sorry, we have a couple comments from these lovely listeners that we have there. First of all, Igor wants to know if Gabriel will sell him starter culture. I'm sure.
Piece of Lazarus.
If you could, I'm sure if you could package it, you could package it, you could ship it. I say that Igor should reach out to Gabriel on Discord and duke it out. I'm sure that's a possibility. Second of all, Shambhavi suggests that we make our own, and yes, we are making our own. Gabriel or Dennis, how do you make your own?
What exactly you refer to now?
I don't know anything. Talk about what you make.
Ferment. I will start before Gabriel can go into the more difficult. But the experience I have with fermentation is like straightforward and super simple and very easy. So I can just feel I can do it like that, and it works for me. And I know like people have been taking it like, to extreme ends, and there's all kind of things you can add to it, and so it's amazing where you can go with. I've heard of that, and I've seen some of it, but for me so far the path I've been going with fermentation, it's just straightforward, super simple. Actually, I can show you like the little jar. So all I really need is any kind of vegetable, pretty much, and I will chop it down, and then the only ingredient that I use is salt. So I just make sure I get a good salt, like I think some you could use like Himalayan salt, but I found like a lot of fraud with it because it's super expensive, and we have perfectly fine local salt. Like we have salt mines, like underground salt mines here in Germany. So I just get that stuff, and it's perfect. It works great as well, and I think the mineral content of the salt also doesn't lack anything, and it's just not that pink. But then anyway, so I will cut up the zucchini in this case, or mushrooms, or whatever is available, and then I put them in this jar, and then I add like each layer, like I add some salt at the sprinkle on top of it, and then I use like in my case like a smaller jar and kind of squeeze it, or I might marinate it before I put it in a jar as well. So the contact with the salt will bring out the natural like liquid in the food, in the fruit, or in the vegetable. Sorry. And well, I squeeze it, and then the water will slowly like come up, and once the water comes up to a space to a degree where you can see it's all covered, so it has to be all covered by the liquid, and then I add like a small round piece of plastic. Unfortunately, it's plastic. I haven't found anything better, but it's like a food grade plastic that I cut out from some kind of food container, and then I put that on top of the zucchini in this case, and then I put something heavy on top of that, so which ensures that it always stays under the liquid and nothing really can float to the top. And then I just leave it, and that's my favorite part. I just leave it for a couple of days, and then I check on it occasionally. And then I had a few times where there was some like, what do you say, fungus, like growing on top of the water.
Mold.
So that mold, yeah. And then I would just carefully remove that. I never had any problem. It didn't change the taste or did anything. And sometimes there's a little bit of froth, I think you call it, around it, which I just wipe off. But then, most of the time, like it's 4 or 5 days, I leave it in the dark. So I will cover it with a cloth and then put it somewhere in the cupboard and leave it. And then after 5 days, I take it out, and then I eat it with pretty much everything I eat. I just eat this along with, and I've had some really fantastic results with it. Yeah, that's all I'm doing to ferment. But I'm sure you can take it to other lengths and add different seasons and yeah, but I'm sure Gabriel has more experience with that.
So we have 2 more comments from the audience. Igor said he tried making yogurt from raw milk and it went nowhere. And that he does not have a whole lot of confidence in his ability to ferment. And then, LOL. There's a new one. Robbie,
Robbie Legourveau. He's in my accountability group.
Legourveau. Okay. It took me a second. I was like, man, I'm such a bad Cajun. I should know how to say that. But you threw me for a loop, Robbie. He says, or they say they sell glass weights for fermentation. I'm not sure. What would you use glass weights for?
To push down the food.
Check it out. Like
Oh, okay.
Like that's my glass weight, which is just a small glass jar which kind of fits on top of that. So this will keep the little plastic lid on top of the vegetable down, so it stays under the water line, I guess you can call it.
Okay, that's cool.
Exactly, and I use the glass weights myself. It was something I did with enough regularity to merit the cost. But you can get glass weights that fit just the top of a wide mouth mason jar, and you can use those for just about everything.
Nice.
So, what else can we ferment? Wait, but Gabriel, you do a lot of different milk fermentations too. Like you have like 7 different things.
I do have a lot of dairy cultures as well. So in addition to sourdough and pickling, we've got the dairy cultures. And so they do act a little bit differently. They are a more diverse community of microbes. In fact, the most diverse that I can think of as a nice example is kefir. So kefir grains, as we know them, theoretically came down from the Caucasus Mountains, where the conditions were such that they were able to cultivate all of the positive and mutually supportive microbes into one culture. And what they found that when introducing that to different forms of dairy, they could really exponentially grow the versatility of that dairy. So you can use it to make just kefir. You can use to make yogurt type products. You can use it to make beverages. You can use it to make cheese. Really the sky's the limit. Anything that you can think of doing with dairy combined with culture, you can accomplish with this. And so that's one nice example. The answer to the people that have problems with yogurt cultures, I can speak to a little bit. I reached out and I found a source for good, wholesome, living, complete communities of microbes for different kinds of yogurt. For example, there's yogurts from the Caspian Sea region, I believe near Georgia, and those have characteristics of a thinner, stronger flavor. And you also have Scandinavian, I believe, culture referred to as Filmjölk, which is FIL space MJOLK. However you choose to pronounce that is up to you, and I don't judge. But that one I really like for creating. It's really creme fraiche. It's basically sour cream with a nice sort of like a. There's nutty notes, there's different elements to it, and of course, that can be expanded depending on where you source your dairy, because the medium plays a big part in what the output will look like. And I also have a buttermilk culture, and that one is more traditional run-of-the-mill buttermilk, not like what you get when you make butter and you discard the whey, but the fermentation of milk into a buttermilk that has the pleasant characteristics, that nice subtle sweet or sourness, subtle sweetness, and that thickness and richness. And good news is that all three of the cultures that I use are actually mesophilic, which means that you do not require a great deal of temperature control. There are thermophilic dairy cultures which require temperature control, high 80s, low 90s is where they seem to be happy. And you have to get like a yogurt maker. Some people do really good just with their oven and capitalizing on the heat generated by the light inside the oven. So they'll leave the oven off. They'll crack it open in the broiler position, and that will activate the light, which generates enough heat to maintain a consistent temperature that's, for some people, good enough for the thermophilic cultures. But mine, all you do is you just eat what you want. I'll eat mine right out of the jar, and then I will go back with the milk that I can get. I like a cream top milk that I get from a local distributor, and I use that. So every time I consume some yogurt or some buttermilk, I just leave that jar on the counter with whatever's left in it. It could be half a jar, it could be just the dregs that you need a spatula to scrape, and filling that up with the desired medium and fuel. And if it's just jar scrapings, I'll put a lid on it and I'll shake it up a little bit just to agitate those and distribute them through the dairy. But otherwise, it's not necessary. You just pour it over your existing cultured dairy and you just stir it in, and just like sourdough, it comes to life in a matter of a day or three, depending on your conditions, your ambient temperature, humidity, and other factors like that.
I remember, like, way back, my mommy, she had like one of those little machines as well. It was a little round machine which would control the temperature again. And then I wonder if that's what didn't work out for Igor when he tried to make the yogurt, because just like you said, you always have to have like a little starter, like a piece of leftover or like a spoonful of yogurt. So she would put that in all the glass jars that were in that machine, and then add milk, and then sure enough we had enough yogurt again for another day to live.
Exactly. And you can capitalize on those lab cultures to give your dairy a kickstart, right? So you can get one of those grocery store off-the-shelf yogurts with, it has to say live culture, but if you can get that product and you can introduce that to your raw milk, you'll find that it can kickstart that process. And from there, from that point, once those conditions are created, then it will actually become attractive to the other microbes that are ambient in your air and everywhere around us. And it'll refine that community and weed out the bad and encourage, promote, and invite the good.
We have something here that's called it's called quark. Have you ever come across that?
Quark, yeah, I'm familiar. I haven't done it myself, but I am familiar.
Okay, everywhere I went, like I asked people about that, and nobody ever heard of the word or couldn't even imagine what that was. So I haven't seen it like on any shelf like outside of Germany, the places I went to. Is that being sold commercially in the States or in Canada?
You can find it in Canada. I don't know of Mexico. I don't know if Mike is adventurous eater enough to know what quark is. But
I've never seen it at Walmart, so I don't know.
Oh, yeah.
I hope everyone can pick up on my sarcasm. It's not the only place I shop.
We're laughing.
So you can compare it to kefir cheese in terms of texture and on some elements in the flavor as well. You're thinking like somewhere between yogurt and cream cheese, like a nice unctuous thick cheese type dairy product. And you can create the conditions for your own, you can improvise, or you can get it straight from the source, which I usually recommend just to generate a baseline so you know what you're looking for when you do set out on your own.
It's a little grainy like ricotta, but I quite like it. It's kind of similar to ricotta, but not quite. So
that's of interest to me.
Ricotta?
I do love ricotta cheese.
Well, you can make it yourself. You know what? It's so super easy to make cheese. I'll give you guys a super easy recipe. But before I do that, I want to tell you something else. Each one of these dairy cultures that Gabriel mentioned, and also the water kefir, and the sour milk, and the buttermilk, and the sour cream, all of them have different sets of bacteria in them. They're not all the same. Like kefir and yogurt, not the same bacteria. That's why they taste different. Buttermilk and sour milk, not the same bacteria. That's why they taste different. So they all have benefits. They all benefit your inner probiotic bacteria, whatever, but they're all different. And that's why it's worth it to have a different ones, right? But the recipe, I'll blow your guys' mind. So whether you make your own yogurt at home or your own buttermilk at home or you buy it commercially, either way, this recipe works really great. So what you do is you take a big pot and you put buttermilk, even from a box, buttermilk in there, say like 2 liters. And then one like 500 milliliter, I know I'm speaking liters to people in America. 2 liters is what, 2 gallons? And then 500 milliliters is half a gallon.
Fuck if I know, man.
Yeah, half a gallon. So you put a half gallon of like whipping cream or something in it, depending how fatty you want it. So any kind of cream or even milk. I've sometimes thrown like leftover milk that I had in this pot. And then you cook it on really, really low temperature for a while. And so now the buttermilk is sour, the milk is sweet, but once it mixes with the buttermilk allows for the solids to separate from the whey. And then all you have is on top, you got floating these milk solids, and on the bottom, you got the liquidy whey. So then you just strain it. You can use the whey for different things, watering your plants, different things depending on the stuff, look it up. But the actual solids, you can strain it through a cheesecloth, and then you basically have ricotta right there. Not quite as grainy as ricotta, more smooth to the tongue, but it's like a homemade cheese like that. You can use it for cheesecake, you can use it for lasagna, you can use it for anything.
And I can speak on that a little bit as well. So that's one way to do that. And
Igor's correcting my measurements. Hang on, 2 liters is half a gallon.
Yeah.
Anyway.
He also said hi to Robbie.
Hi, Robbie.
1.8, I believe. Right? I think 1.8 is half a gallon.
Anyway,
I had a question about it's not about fermentation, but you know that nursery rhyme where it's like so and so sitting there eating her curds and whey?
Little Miss
Is
Muffet?
that what it's
Little
talking
Miss
about?
Muffet.
Little Miss Muffet. Is that like is the whey? I always thought that was like some sort of porridge.
No, it's the byproduct of making cheese. So
It's
the
the
curds in the
liquidy
whey
bit.
is just like a loose cottage cheese.
Ew, that makes that whole nursery rhyme so. Ugh.
That's why the spider came down.
Not for everybody, yeah. But there is one other technique for ricotta before we move on too far, and that is to just get your regular run-of-the-mill, as fatty as you can get it, milk, and you give it the same setup. So put it in a big pot, and you bring it up gradually in temperature, and you can use any kind of acid. Buttermilk is in the recipe that Agnieszka outlined is introducing the acidity, and the acidity combined with the heat causes the curds to separate from the whey. So you can be anything you like. White vinegar obviously is going to have a cleaner flavor, but I'm sure you have a lot of vinegars in your cupboard there that could use a little experimentation, and this is a good opportunity for that, to create different savory cheeses and different ways of going about it. And the whey in itself is another valuable ingredient that we can talk about maybe in another episode. But that's something really valuable in potion mastery, personal care, and all kinds of other applications.
So
It's not
don't
just
dump
for
it
food.
in the sink.
Do not waste that whey, for sure. You can even make caramel from it, which is delicious, I might add.
Ooh, that sounds
Cool.
good.
You just cook it down or what?
All right,
Man,
so
we can-
you
we can
take.
introduce all kinds of new foods to
There we are. So
Acapulco here.
Yeah.
Poor Willow.
so
I'm so hungry. I just keep getting hungrier and hungrier.
Well, I hope this doesn't hurt too much, Willow, but it bears exploration. So one of the things that you can do with whey after you have your way with it, so to speak, is you basically take a regular caramel recipe, which is real simple. It's just sugar in a pot with a little bit of water, except you replace that water with the whey. So what the whey is going to do is it's going to introduce some pleasant sour notes, and what I argue is a beautiful contrast for the caramelization process of the sugar itself, because sugar or caramel is just sugar. As it breaks down, it separates into separate types of sugars, and some of those sugars have a high smoke point and some have a low. And so you're reaching this nice, beautiful balance of burning a couple of the sensitive sugars and leaving the other ones intact. And if you're using whey as your medium for producing this caramel, you're going to get all of the nice flavor notes that come in addition to the nutritional benefits of the whey.
I have an interesting historical anecdote about the benefits again of fermentation, the other process that we have been touching upon. Do you know what Germans or German soldiers called nicknamed English soldiers in the First and even in the Second World War?
Tom, right?
Yeah, Toms or Tommies.
Tommy,
And do you know?
yeah.
And do you know what Germans were called?
Krauts.
Jerry's, I believe.
Say
Jerry's.
it again.
Juries or Krauts.
I think it was
yeah.
Jerry's. I thought
That
that's where
was-
the name Tom and Jerry came from the cartoon.
I was just about to ask, is that where Tom and Jerry came from? That makes a lot of sense.
That's interesting. I didn't know that one. But what Mike was saying a while ago, that was the one I had in mind, which is Krauts. And you know where that come from?
Sauerkraut.
Sauerkraut.
Food.
Yeah, exactly. And that was a huge thing in Germany back then, because unlike other European nations like the English, for example, who had like huge colonies all over the world, Germany did have a few at times, but not that large. And we still had a navy. And so being on sea for like several weeks at a time, you would have to fear a condition called scurvy, which is caused by lack of vitamin C. And because we didn't have many oversea colonies that where we had an exchange of goods in terms of lemon, lime, vitamin C giving fruits, which is what the English through their trade with their
limeys.
colonies.
Yeah, they were called limeys for that reason, right?
There you go. Yeah. So they would cover their vitamin C needs through that, which Germans didn't have at the time. So they would use sauerkraut, which is a fermented product as well. It tastes actually great to supply the vitamin C needs and to fight scurvy on sea.
Right.
But
And so why
that's-
did they choose that? So they chose that because it's shelf stable. It doesn't require refrigeration. it's another example of fermentation as the gift that keeps on giving. And kraut, even sauerkraut, is another example where you can eat what you want from the source, and then stir more in fresh product that you used as a base, and you can top it off and maintain that food store. So in tighter times, you have something you can count on, and it's always full. Your tank is always full when you keep up with your ferments that way.
Well, and it also provides electrolytes and things that sailors might need, you know, a lot more than lemon juice would.
Right.
Or
Well, because
or
salt
Brondo.
because salt is such a critical element to fermentation of vegetables, it's also a way of capturing that. And we were talking a little bit about the sort of hip shot technique for fermentation. And so what you're looking for when you're fermenting vegetables, zucchini and stuff like that is a good example. I personally, however, prefer root vegetables, vegetables that are dense, thick, tough, and things that your body would normally need help digesting anyway. And you'll find that the starch content found in those is really high and very supportive of the microbes. So when I do a ferment, you're shooting for by weight 5% salinity, which just means by weight 5% salt to water, and that you can measure that with precision. You can break out your kitchen scale. You can break it down to tenths of a gram if you want, but sorry, this is where I'm lazy. So what I'll do is I will chop up the vegetables in whatever format I want to eat them. And I just put a little bit of salt in the palm of my hand and rub that salt over all of the surface of the vegetables. And it doesn't pulverize them. It doesn't beat them up too much. It just sort of disturbs the outer cells and allows the liquid to permeate through and makes some really nice pickles. So for softer material...
Wait. And then you fill it up with water. You skip the water bit.
I skipped the water part. So when you're packing, you want to get that, you want to rub down all the vegetables, and then I just drop them in as I go. So I rub them with salt and drop them in the jar, and I fill up the jar as high as I can, while still allowing enough room for the glass weight or whatever you're using to keep it below the water line. And if you salt right, you're going to land between 5 and 10% salinity, which is perfect. It doesn't overpower, it doesn't oversalt. And you can do this with just about anything. I've done things that are really fine chop for things like chilies, to ferment those as a base for chili sauce. Another one that's really good is tomato. You can ferment tomato, and just I like quarters or eighths, and just gently rub it with salt and drop it in there. And the thing with mushy vegetables is they get really soft in fermentation, but you can use them as a base. So you can use them as a base for sauces, and different things you might want to cook in a pan as a way to finish and give it more body and depth.
Michael, what is the problem?
Just had a sneeze, but I did want to include Louis Pasteur's famous last words, which was, "Bernard was right. The pathogen is nothing. The terrain is everything."
That's right.
And essentially, Louis Pasteur. I really dislike the guy. He's really screwing up our modern world.
Because the germ theory.
Support the idea.
Well, we're talking about germ theory versus terrain theory, and the theory is that there are germs on our body all the time, but when the terrain changes, where the body chemistry changes, that's when the germs become out of balance on the body, as opposed to them attacking the body from the outside and invading like a force.
It fits the narrative, like it's something very useful, right, for people who are trying to sell us something that will help us defend against the attacker that comes from the outside. Because if you have something coming from the outside which is attacking you, then of course you need something to boost your ability to defend and to fight it off, and a lot of money can be made with that.
Well, and we're also demonizing all these microbes and stuff that essentially are, a lot of cases, are friends, and things that can be beneficial to us, and we're just, throwing that all away. So I mean, I feel like, this in that regard, this is a very important show.
And then on top of that, when you're told to just, throw all this stuff away and we should avoid it, they're then selling you back probiotics that aren't doing shit to fix the problem that you could have fixed if you just eaten the right food.
Okay, so hang on. So the official narrative is that you couldn't possibly figure out how to ferment your own shit because you're obviously an idiot. And so you have to avoid these simple techniques of rubbing salt and pouring water onto vegetables in order to ferment them and provide a probiotic of your own. And then you have to get something that's been sitting on the shelf in powder form for many months or even years and pretend that that has the probiotic in it that the sauerkraut that you could just create in a week doesn't. Is that right? Is that controversial? Too controversial? Did I get carried away?
Hey, the truth hurts sometimes.
It's amazing. Like if you go into, sorry, go ahead, Gabriel.
Well, I think to Michael's point, I think it's a really important takeaway that if fermentation can teach us anything, it's that germ theory, whatever you may think of it, is incomplete, and that it's important that we support the life that benefits us. And fermentation is a perfect example of that because it's supporting life in the food, which allows the food to provide us in return with more life as a result.
Beautifully put. Dennis? Does your other comment pale in comparison or what?
Well, it adds perfect to it, in my opinion. I'm not sure if it's too far over the edge for this show, but like if you're going to microbiotics into the kind of microbiotics that we inhabit in our body, and the kind of research and experiments and I would say like healing results people have achieved with that, both supplementing microbiotics from above as well as from below. Not sure if you heard about that, but there has been there's been ways of inoculating the microbiotic environment that you have inside yourself through the exit side of your body, and there have been like tremendous changes in not only the physicality but even in the emotion, in the life experience of people just through that, basically by reviving or introducing a microbiotic environment that those people had lost because of, let's say, antibiotic treatments or different life conditions that they went under, and some like even report of certain behavioral patterns being repeated by the person that would have received that inoculation or that microbiotic environment.
So this is like through a suppository, is what you're saying? That's the other end.
Let me look up the word.
Exit
can you describe
end.
the word with some? Yes. Sorry, I did not.
That's a pill that you put in the exit of your body. Exit apparatus.
I guess you can imagine it like that. Yes.
It's worth. I think that speaks to the implants as well that have picked up some headlines more recently. And what they're doing is they're introducing new flora or new microbes into that part of the body, and they're allowing the body to complete what was lost in terms of the metabolic process.
So are
get
these?
some of that back?
No, I'm really curious about what Dennis said though. Are these suppositories something you can actually purchase and stick it up there?
I believe that's what Gabriel just mentioned. What I heard of, I did not know about that. I just heard about, doctors. That was not pills, but it was something else they used to put it up there.
Like an enema?
Yeah, like that.
Okay.
So,
Well, in regard to antibiotics, are you of the mindset that is just not good, period, for people to take, or even for animals and so forth?
Why don't we have an opinion of everybody in the room? Because I think that there will be some differences, but let's take a turn. You boys go ahead. Dennis, what's your opinion of antibiotics?
Well, I can't remember when last I got some or take some, and it's hard for me to imagine that I would allow my children to be treated with them, unless that was like the last of the last resource. And even then, I mean, there's stuff way much better, like the colloidal silver that I mentioned. Does pretty much everything as far as I understand that antibiotics can do, minus the damage that it does to the good bacteria that we've been talking about. So I have a few things that I would rather use much earlier.
But what are so colloidal silver, and what else would you use instead of an antibiotic for your? I know we're gonna have a whole other show about natural healing, but I just want to get like hot topic opinion on this.
Oh, but there's a bunch of like natural foods that you can even use. Talk about ginger, talk about turmeric, talk about garlic. We've touched upon a few of those in the past Wednesdays, I believe, especially. There's this other plant, what's it called? Artemisia annua, that I mentioned also lately, which I just came across recently, which is, being researched and used actually for, I believe it was malaria and other like lung infections as well. So yeah, there's really a bunch of things that I would much rather use first, and that maybe as a last resort, if nothing else could happen, if it's really like a life or death situation. I don't know if there's somebody out there who could convince me to use it, but I feel it's difficult, but I'm not excluding anything, But yeah, like I can't see myself using that or using it on my children. And I think it's really just a question of, going out there, informing yourself and doing some research. And if you don't want to do that, then, go and meet people who are knowledgeable about other options that
all right. We're not talking about people. We're just talking about the opinion of the group here. So next, Willow, your opinion, or Gabriel, whichever is ready to go.
My opinion, I have a very personal experience with antibiotics. I have had urinary tract infections since I was about 4 years old. So I have been on and off antibiotics for most of my childhood and most of my adult life, to the point where I knew exactly what antibiotics I was prescribed. I'd go into the doctor, I'd tell them what I had, I'd tell them what they need to prescribe me. They come back with that, oh my God, how did you get a medical degree and figure all this out? And be like, oh yeah, you're going to prescribe me that, right? Okay, cool. I stopped using antibiotics because obviously it wasn't helping. I was still getting infections. I was still having problems with my health. And then I realized that they actually kill off your own immune system, or, diminish it to the point where you don't start producing your own antibodies. So I had to go through a period where I just didn't take any antibiotics, and I used natural antibiotics instead. So I used manuka honey, apple cider vinegars, ginger, garlic, all of that stuff. I haven't had to use them since. But I will say, if you have tried all these other things and you are still getting sick, and you are still, like, it is getting to the point where it's dangerous, it's impeding your ability to function, I'm not opposed to the use of antibiotics that the doctors prescribe. I think, just like with any other surgery or medical attention, that it does have its place, but its place isn't in the everyday care or maintenance of the body. Just like I compare it to like home birth versus, or natural birth versus cesarean. Cesarean is it saved people's lives. It should not be pushed as the everyday, every single woman should get a cesarean. It has a place, and you need to know when to use it and when to abstain from it, because the more you use it, you're using up the supply of actual antibiotics that are available to us. We are running out. The world is running out of antibiotics. So be very careful how often you use them and what you're using them for, because if you can cure or heal the same thing with more organic or natural substances, I will always push those first.
So
but I think in life threatening situations, it can be useful.
When you say we're running out, you mean that bacteria is becoming resistant to the antibiotics, and there are less and less options available to us now.
Yeah, there's less and less options. It's becoming less effective because so many people are on them from a day-to-day basis. And instead of using like more organic or natural substances, they're just.
But you know what's weird? The organic natural substances like the cinnamon, the cloves, the garlic, the colloidal silver, they don't lose in efficacy. It's just the commercial antibiotics that are losing in efficacy, and the bacteria are becoming resistant to. Isn't that interesting? What about you, Gabriel?
That is interesting. I had never thought of that.
What's your stance on antibiotic, Gabriel? Antibiotics.
Oh, well, I think to Willow's point, I look at them like a tool. So we've seen what happens with milk when you destroy the good with the bad. It doesn't get better, it gets worse. And I would argue that that is the majority of my experiences in my life. Through different phases of it, when I was in a situation where I thought I needed the antibiotics, I was getting ear infections, sinus infections, bronchitis, pneumonia, things like that. And I was turning to these, and I was finding that instead of being sick for a couple weeks, well, I was sick for a few months. And so after I get over one, I feel better at first. And because I'm in the same environment and I'm continuing to expose myself to those microbes, those pathogens, however you want to frame it, that my body was less resourceful in terms of fighting it in the future. And so it got progressively worse until I broke that cycle myself. So again, back to the point, this is a tool. If you are in a life-threatening situation where swelling can limit your mobility, prevent you from getting access to more advanced medical care, or, facing death, there are applications where they may be the least worst option. And that's how I try to frame just about everything when it comes to getting sick. You're not getting the best necessarily, you're getting the least worst. Which one is going to displace more of what other things make you healthy in order to accomplish that one goal? For example, in medicine, natural responses are desired. Fevers, headaches, swelling, these things are important processes that your body must undergo in order to fight what's been introduced. And when we introduce antibiotics or treatments as a way to squash those symptoms, not only are we killing our body's one defense, we're making it harder in the long term, and we're squashing those natural defenses in the future as well.
Yeah. I have a very similar story. I had ongoing sinus infections in my 20s and probably into my 30s, and it was just like continual. I had a Western doctor say to me that he won't prescribe any more antibiotics to me because it's going to just like mess my body up. And so he suggested nasal rinses, and then I don't know how, but I gradually just started using more and more natural stuff, and it worked. And now most colds and flus only last 24 hours because I attack it right away with the antibacterial tea or antibacterial, antiviral, both. I have all these recipes that I use in order to keep myself healthy and restore myself within 24 hours usually.
Well, so isn't that one of the benefits of fermenting and basically eating fermented food and so forth, is to kind of create the circumstance where your body is
naturally resilient.
Naturally at its top condition.
But I have to be a little bit of a psychosomatic therapist here, as opposed to just a potion master, because if you take my case, psychosomatically, I had a lot of anger issues, and sinus infections, especially recurring sinus infections, really are about a lot of like residual anger, resentment, holding back anger to somebody close to you, usually, things like that. So let's also acknowledge the fact that my body might have been less equipped to handle it because I had less natural foods that support health and well-being. But also on an emotional level, I had a lot of resentment and anger that was manifesting itself through my body, through these symptoms, right? So any kind of a chronic emotional condition will manifest itself through your body. And I'm not really sure if all the natural remedies in the world will help you if you're chronically angry or chronically resentful or chronically, disgusted with the world. Any of these negative habitual thought patterns have a negative effect on the body.
I actually have something to add to that. In my experience, when that is an issue, the natural process and using natural ingredients to try and fend these off, it does work, but only in tandem with your own spiritual process. Otherwise, it comes back. Like, it'll work, it'll get rid of the symptoms, you'll be better to fend it off. But if you're not doing the actual work, it's gonna come back and you're gonna have reoccurring issues with it, which is a lot of the reason people stop using natural methods and go into the Rockefeller allopathic medicine, because they're like, well, obviously it's not working because it's still coming back. And I'm like,
by the way, recurring urinary tract infections are not much different from recurring sinus infections when it comes to the emotional. It's being chronically pissed off.
Anger and irritation, especially at the opposite sex. And considering the sexual abuse that has been in my past and the things that I'm trying to work with, it makes perfect sense. And it wasn't until I started doing that work that I saw I was recovering faster. So whenever I had an issue, I'd recover faster with the natural methods along with the spiritual work, and I wasn't having as much of an issue. I would get reduced symptoms, or the symptoms wouldn't last as long. It definitely helped, and I think that spiritual work and understanding how your body manifests, how your body will manifest your thoughts and feelings into your physical body. Knowledge about that is really, really important.
Hey, keep an eye on the entry thing, because Gabriel's probably coming back.
Oh yeah.
I think it makes perfect sense what both of you said there, and my old mantra, again, if we are holistic beings, then the response also has to be holistic, because if we were just a body, maybe just the antibiotics or just the natural replacement of that, or no, the antibiotics is the replacement of the natural one, that will take care of it. But because we're so much more and we operate in so many different levels, then the response surely also should be a full spectrum response. So, if the body as our feedback system is giving us a signal, oh, something is going on with your sinus, with the sinuses, then, address it physically, but also address the emotional, the spiritual, the mental side that surely comes with it.
Yeah. What about you, Michael? What's your stance on antibiotics?
I don't take them, and I feel like but mine is essentially just what works. What works is colloidal silver. Colloidal silver works in pretty much all the cases that I can think of. No, I've got we've got a health food store here. The owner of the vegan store here in town is a good friend. And so they've got colloidal silver and all those kind of good stuff, all the natural products and so forth. But, what works is what I'm after. And certainly what doesn't work is antibiotics and just like we were talking about, all the things that come along with it. It doesn't seem to me like hurting your immune system is a good idea if you're worried about,
getting sick,
diseases and cold and stuff like that. So yeah.
Well,
I am very excited about ricotta cheese now, because that's one of the things I can't seem to find in Acapulco, and now I'll just start making my own.
There you have your niche market.
Yeah, well, I can start.
It's slightly different.
Cheese.
It's not the same quite like ricotta when you do the buttermilk thing, but it's similar, right? So like Gabriel said, any acid, even yogurt mixed with milk and cooked slowly. But what I do is I cook it on really low heat for about an hour, and then you can visibly see the separation between the curds and the whey.
So I'm very confused right now. I admitted Gabriel into the conversation. It says that we have 5 participants, but he is nowhere to be seen. Did you turn invisible, Gabriel?
Apparently.
He said he was having issues with his internet, so I just texted him, said, "Come back if you can."
Oh, he's waiting. It says that he's waiting in the lobby or the waiting room thing.
I'm gonna tell him to hang up and try again.
By the way, that's probably another question, is in regard to like what vegans will eat and what they won't, is microbes in that thing, does that affect vegan? Does anybody know that? Will they eat fermented food? I don't want to offend any vegans, but
Well, I would assume
I would
that
like
they
to know.
I would assume they probably do. I'll have to ask. If any of my vegan friends are watching, feel free to shoot me a text and answer this question. But as long as it's not anything that's not vegan.
Well,
they
but
could
where
ferment.
do you draw the line at vegan? Like, is a bacteria an entity? And I'm sure some people have that kind of a like definition of veganism, and for some people, you know, some vegans don't eat honey even though it's made by
Because
insects.
it's the labor of bees,
right?
But some people are not as strict. So there's like even different layers of veganism, where, you know, honey is fine because you're not harming an animal. But taking a duck's or a chicken's eggs would be because you're taking their offspring.
But not really, because as a woman, we create eggs every month, and they're not really used for offspring on a monthly basis.
That is true.
Just saying.
But I would assume that if there's nothing in it, like pickles, I don't think there's anything in pickles.
Well, it's the bacteria that's in the air, right? And it like settles in the pickles and then I
don't know, because at that point, like the really blunt side of me is like, really? Okay, then you might as well just kill yourself, because you have bacteria inside your body. Like, you're breathing in bacteria, and so if, you know, like,
from my experience, I don't think that's a thing really in the vegan community. I might be totally wrong, and you know, but I've never come across anyone like
having
not
issues
eating
with
fermented
ferments.
foods in the vegan community. And I've had my share of experience with that quite a few years back. But so I wasn't into fermenting or didn't know much about fermenting then. But I've never come across anyone vegan or even raw vegan, which is what I experimented with quite a bit. Had problems with fermented food.
I experimented with raw, but never really vegan, because I always had like eggs or meat on my raw food, or even like sushi or something. So
yeah, I've never experimented with anything vegan, really. I want to prefer meat way too much. I'm a meat eater, but there's quite a few vegetarian dishes that I absolutely love and prefer over the meat ones. But yeah, I've never run into that where someone has been so militantly vegan that they're like, no microbes, no bacteria. It seems a little too far extreme, even for the most extreme.
It's crazy vegetarians like me.
I thought honey was a little extreme myself. But
I did too, especially considering most beekeepers actually remove part of the honeycombs so that the bees can continue using that nest, because once that nest is full, they leave it. So it's not like they're using the honey to like live off of. It's not their main food source. Like, they have so much excess of it that they literally will just walk away from it or fly away from it.
I have a comment here from Shambhavi. Yeah, I didn't really say that was ricotta, because she's asking about ricotta cheese. What I described as ricotta cheese is actually called farmer's cheese. It probably is called farmer's cheese. Ricotta cheese has a slightly different process where you add a different chemical into the milk. I don't know what it is, rennet or something like that. Right. Where you add it into the milk and then it curds into those little curds that ricotta has. Whereas the cheese that I described made out of buttermilk, it doesn't have those single curds. It's more creamy, and yeah, it probably is called farmer's cheese, but it's similar-ish. That's as far as I go.
It is, and farmer's cheese, you know, they'll traditionally just take it to the next level. So they'll put it in a cheesecloth and wrap it up so that it's got a little bit of pressure applied to it, and then they'll let that force it out, and you'll get a more contiguous block of what most people think more of as cheese.
I see. I don't even do that. I actually, what I was doing, I have this strainer with really fine holes in it. So I don't even put cheesecloth on it. I just dump it into that strainer, and it keeps enough of the curd. And then I let it sit in that strainer until most of the water or liquid drips out. And then the creamy, sort of not quite hard, but still spreadable stuff is what I use for stuff.
And before I got dropped, I wanted to speak to the medicine a little bit more and throw in a bonus in terms of fermentation. So we talked about how your mood, your nature has an impact on your health, and you can improve it not just from the things you consume, but aligning other things in your life. And has anyone ever heard of potpourri?
Yes.
Yeah.
But not the kind
All right.
you're talking about.
Well, they were one and the same back at some point, but that's drastically changed since. So potpourri is actually a translation, loosely, to rot pot. And this is speaking to the process and how it comes to be. So when I make a potpourri, I will look for elements that are going to improve my state in terms of aromatherapy and that sort of thought process. And to make a potpourri, it's very much like the fermentations that we've described before. So you collect
flower petals and and orange rind and different things, and you put it in a pot, and it ferments and somehow magically turns into potpourri. I think Gabriel's having internet issues. But that's what that's what he's told me before about, like, when we were preparing for the show. He talked about the ferment that is potpourri, which is not an edible ferment, but
what was the bonus? What was the bonus?
What bonus?
That's a cliffhanger.
He said there was going to be a bonus. Oh, no.
We might have to wait till next Wednesday for the bonus.
He'll be back.
No bonus.
Something that,
if he
that I
it.
think pulls together the discussion we had earlier about the antibiotics and the fermentation process would be that fermented foods, because they are rich in probiotics and because they have they create an acidic environment, they actually aid in the production of substances in the gut that again produce antibiotic, antifungal, and even antiviral substances in our own gut. So I think that's that's a fact that we can pull together the two discussions, and where they actually, are very related.
So why are probiotics so important for the gut, Dennis? What do they do?
I guess that goes into like what we touched upon earlier about the environment in the gut that we have, which really seems to how would I say, like a lot of our behavior, even not only our physicality, but then also again, the emotions and even thinking process are influenced by what happens in the gut. And if you go into researching the gut, then isn't there like even a saying as well, like if you have a healthy gut, you basically have a healthy body. So there's a huge relation between the environment that you're able to stabilize in your gut, which reflects in your overall health and vitality.
Well, I think it's something like, it's not happy wife, happy life, but it's the one, like the key to a man's heart is through his stomach. That's it. That's the one, right?
Yeah, I've heard that before.
Yeah.
I think that can also be attributed to women, because I guarantee you put a cheesecake in front of me and I'm your best friend.
Well, we
A
got
probiotic
Gabriel
cheesecake.
back. We got Gabriel back in time for the bonus.
All right.
They were all distraught about the bonus.
Before I was so rudely interrupted.
But I finished that sentence for you about the ingredients of the potpourri, so you can just go directly into the bonus if you want.
So okay. Well, I'd like to cover the process, but so you rub the rose petals with salt, and you do the same with any of your other ingredients. For example, orange petal, lavender. You don't have to salt. You can just throw it in, and anything else that you want that helps improve your mood, improves your well-being. Just your sense of well-being is enough a lot of the time, and you create the same conditions. You apply pressure after you've salted the material. You'll come back the next day and you apply some pressure. I like that glass weight. And if you do that, you'll find that the rose petals express all of the liquid that was trapped in them, all the water, the oil, and all that. And it creates a liquid barrier that rises up above the plant material. And I have a potpourri that I haven't looked at, I haven't touched. It's sat on my counter for over a year. And I just uncovered it the other night. And it's still going strong in more ways than one, but all of them good. And it still smells nice, it still functions well, and all I have to do to restore it or change it is just to add new ingredients. And that's another great way to support your health through fermentation.
Awesome.
Nice one. Thank you so much for sharing that.
Golden.
Man, when
Another
I
golden
I
shell.
want to smell the the sense of well-being, I just make a pot of jambalaya. Yours sounds way better.
And less work.
It keeps better,
That's
just a
true.
little.
Well, I just wanted to, like what Dennis mentioned about the gut stuff, and like, you know, with a lot of the stuff like the antibiotics, when you damage your gut bacteria, then there's all kinds of other stuff that kind of takes over. And like, what's the thing that eats like the sugar and kind of lives on sugar, and you know, can kind of
Candida?
Yeast.
yeah, that stuff.
Oh,
Yeah.
candida, yeah.
Same.
Yeah, well, yeast as well.
Yeah.
But yeah, you start to create an environment in your guts and in your you know, your bowels and stuff that is essentially not good for absorbing the minerals and the nutrients in the food, right?
Yes, and in that case, you might eat the best food ever, but it's just passing through, and you're not getting anything out of it. And yeah, so that's, I believe, you know, it's again like if our body is a feedback mechanism. Was it Einstein who said that the definition of insanity is if you keep on doing the same thing and expecting different results? So, you know, whatever angle you tackle the problem, you know, if you're starting on the physical level, I think the gut is a very good place to start, you know. And then was it last Wednesday that we talked about cleansing and detoxifying? So a huge part of that obviously is like to stop putting toxins in your body, because it doesn't, you know, if you start to toxify, but just you continue putting toxins in your body, then, you know, you're only going to get so far. It's still better than not doing anything, but you know, adding to the discussion of last week, so detoxifying the gut, you know, also has a huge benefit, because if you at the same time start to introduce things like fermented foods, then you will even get more benefit out of that, because your body will be able to absorb more of the higher nutrient density of those foods.
And I'm glad you mentioned toxicity. So I have a sensitivity to wheat, gluten, however you want to frame it. And I had to abandon all of those products for a long time. But one thing I discovered through experimentation was that when I passed that through the fermentation process, for example, through sourdough, I don't get that brick feeling in my gut anymore. I can process what I'm eating, and it goes through much more happily, I should say. And it's supportive of your gut biome on a number of levels. It breaks down the barriers that allow your body to access more directly the nutrients, and it helps mitigate some of the problems that your body normally would negatively react to. I don't get swollen up, I don't get a sore gut, I don't get those problems when I consume a sourdough culture as opposed to traditional flour products. And this can also be reflected in some fermented products as well. A lot of people with lactose intolerance are advised by medical professionals even to consume live cultures in dairy. For example, yogurt in small amounts in a live culture can help create the foundation for their body to be able to digest those other forms of dairy and some vegetables as well.
I have a friend who he's lactose intolerant, and come to find out, he is when he drinks a glass of milk, but whenever he eats cheese, depending on what kind of cheese it is, and usually it's the more fermented ones with specific process, he can digest them pretty easily.
And that is really one of the huge benefits of fermented foods, right? Which we haven't mentioned until now, which is that they help to neutralize anti-nutrients. Just like you mentioned about they help to break down phytic acid, for example, and you can use them like if you like to ferment, whether it's your lentils or your peas or beans, then that will also help you to digest. That will make it much more easier for your body, just as you described with the sourdough, to break up the food and to get the nutrients out. So, and that's something I believe traditionally that has been traditionally practiced by people all over the world. Like even like grandma would leave the oats for the breakfast like overnight, standing outside, just covered with a cloth, and put little milk in it. So even simple and easy to do things like that, leaving the peas to soak overnight, that those little things, they make a huge difference once you digest them and once they get down into your gut.
Yeah, and leveraging those microbes to do some of that digestion and some of the work for you is an outstanding way of doing that. And we see it reflected in nature. Look at birds. Baby birds are fed by their parents, who chew up the food, break it down, and sometimes it's exposed to their natural digestive process before it's introduced to the baby. And so the baby's body doesn't have to work to break those down into the components that it needs. It's already got a head start. The food that they're getting is already in the process of delivering those nutrients directly to them. All they have to do is consume it, and the nutrients are there for their body to draw upon much more easily than if they were given the whole piece. And just like babies, humans have the same process.
Yeah, I was just gonna add, like same with us with babies, like that is actually one way, as far as I learned, how the father also can transfer some of the immunity that he would have built and the resilience that he would have, or resistance that he would have built to the baby, by chewing the food that is given to the baby afterwards.
Interesting.
Well, I think we're
5 minutes past.
Yeah.
We were 5 minutes late.
Actually, I think we were only like 3 minutes off of our normal start time, which is 35 after the hour. So
because that's how long it takes us to get our shit together.
I think we're always in time.
Yeah.
We try.
Well, better late than never.
We do our best. But we really appreciate everybody who stayed with us till the end and is still listening. And we think that this episode was a lot of fun. Next Wednesday, we're going to do something equally educational and entertaining about health, I think. I think we're going to continue with this series. Because just as we were talking, I was thinking about water. We should do a whole episode about water. Water is very important. And
I've got some questions about water.
So maybe we should do water next week. But there are also the natural remedies we were talking about. So, and then in 3 weeks, we have a foraging expert joining us on a Wednesday. So, there's a lot of fun stuff coming up.
Awesome.
Yeah.
Alrighty. Well, if you're interested in finding where we're at, we can be located on Facebook and websites and all that kind of good stuff. Our website is raisingexcellence.live, and our show is on Mondays and Wednesdays at 5:35 Eastern Time.
2:30 Pacific.
11:30 Berlin.
11:30 p.m. Berlin time.
Alrighty. Well, thank you, everybody. And,
thank you.
Appreciate your time and attention.
Thank you, Gabriel, for being a special guest, a special recurring guest.
Yes, for dropping all his knowledge.
That's right.
Man, I'm telling you, he's just like an encyclopedia of great knowledge.
Absolutely. All right, I'm going to play the outro now, and we're going to say goodbye. All right? All right. Bye, everybody.
Bye.
Bye.